Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Growing TypeScript and Rust. Give Jonathan Turner a big hand of applause.
Right, so yeah, this is Growing TypeScript and Rust. We're talking not so much about the technology, so this kind of a are you in the right room check or watching the right video online. Instead, we're talking about how to grow an open source project. When I started on TypeScript, it was very small, and we helped grow it to a much larger project. And in this talk, I'm talking about how we did that. You don't have to be working on your own programming language that you want to grow to get something out of this talk. My hope is that these are really general principles for growing open source projects and that they can kind of transfer from the programming language domain to yours. I was describing this talk to a friend of mine, and he said, you know, you could have called it How We Convinced Microsoft to Go Open Source, which is also something I'll be talking about in this talk as well. So if you wanted some of the historical background about how Microsoft shifted to being more open source friendly, I'll talk about that. A little bit about me. My name is Jonathan Turner. I was the program manager at Microsoft on the TypeScript team from its nascent baby days through to its colossal growth with things like adopting Angular, which is a really popular JavaScript framework. After that, I left TypeScript. I was like, that's cool. I will never touch another programming language again. A month later, playing with Rust, I said, I might have to change my mind about that. This is really cool. And sure enough, I started asking around. They were looking for someone that could do something similar with Rust that I did with TypeScript. So I joined and kind of carried that forward. So this talk will talk about the TypeScript years and then talk about what I learned in the Rust years as well. I'm still a Rust community team member, so I still contribute, I still run the survey. So I still have a finger in if you have any questions about that specifically. I was trying to think of like, what's my open source cred here for this audience? My first Linux install was in 1996, Slackware, a stack of 3.5-inch floppies. Anyone else do that? Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's great. Okay, I'm not alone. I almost didn't ask who else did that because you don't want to date yourself too badly. All right, here's the equation we want to solve in general. And this equation we can kind of unpack for days. I'm going to do my best to fit some good stuff in for the next 40 minutes. We have code. We can always grow our code to be more code. It can do more things. And we want to grow the project. But there's, in between, there's kind of a little something that we need to do to help that code reach the audience, to help the contributors find this project. And that's, again, what we'll be talking about. But before we kind of talk about why, before we talk about how to do it, let's talk a little bit about why. This might be obvious to a lot of you because of the open source background. But if I'm just one person and I'm working on my little pet project, and then something happens, I get distracted, then the project just languishes. So growing the support structure around the project allows it to have that longevity, allows it to kind of change and mature through time. It also allows us to mentor people. So Linux is a great example. People want to hack on the kernel. So they come, they have a bunch of experts sitting there that can teach them how to hack on the kernel. Great. We have a mentorship opportunity that new people come in, they can learn and then pass it on to the next generation. Also, it's fun. This is like maybe a bit cheeky, but because it's fun to grow the project, it kind of gives us incentive to continue with it as well as the kind of creators of this project. We see people coming in with their enthusiasm, their new ideas, and we're like, you know what? That's a good idea, or I can do better than that, and it kind of creates this virtuous cycle. All right, so let's dive into part one, this TypeScript side. For those who remember Microsoft back in the day, let's just call it the assault on the open source community back in the 90s, let's be honest. And then they had a period where they weren't quite as aggressive, but they would put stuff out into open source, kind of in a fire and forget. They'd release it to open source, then they would take that team and then just move on to something else. So this is the history leading up to when TypeScript was open sourced. This was one of the first times that Microsoft was going to put something into the open source, have a team behind it that would continue to support it, So we're not just fire and forget, and then learn from how we're doing it. As you can imagine, this landed like a Led Zeppelin with a lot of people because of Microsoft's background with open source, and because TypeScript itself was a JavaScript tool. Again, we ran into this, who are you, Microsoft? Like, we are JavaScript developers, we all use Macs, we don't need you. So there's definitely a bit of butting heads. I'm gonna just take a quick pause and say a big thanks to the teams that we worked with, the mentors that I worked with to be able to do this. When I came into this, I was just a developer. I'd been doing development for 10 plus years, but I'd never done any management, any thinking about the project at the project level. And so they did a lot to help me out. I found a picture of back in the day. You may recognize me, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed in the middle. You might also recognize the guy sitting beside me, which is Anders Hellsberg, who invented Turbo Pascal, C#, and then later would go on to help with the TypeScript project. So I don't know what I'm doing. I'm very nervous, and I'm trying to just see if we can figure out how to help this thing grow. As you can tell, it was a small team, right? There was only that set of us in Microsoft, and whoever we could convince outside of Microsoft to help pitch in on the project. We had arguably a good idea, right? Let's add some optional typing to JavaScript and see what happens. That's what you can do with tooling. You might not believe me, but we also had zero marketing budget. Open source makes no money for Microsoft. It doesn't sell Visual Studio licenses. And so marketing looked at us and said, well, that's nice. Have fun. If we ever have a requirement to promote TypeScript, we'll come back to you. So we had to do everything ourselves. We had to write blog posts. We had to get on Twitter. We had to get on any social media we could that people would listen to us and tell our story over and over again. We also had to use this thing called Codeplex. Just out of curiosity, has anyone ever heard of Codeplex before? Wow. Okay, for those who haven't seen this thing, that's Codeplex. So as you can imagine, if Microsoft has a technology that is like GitHub, but not GitHub, and the VPs are very keen on us using it, then we use that. That's okay. At least TypeScript is going open, and we can reach potential users and potential contributors, even if it's through Codeplex. Spoiler alert, we did get on GitHub later on. So I'm kind of bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. I don't really know what I'm doing. We release into the public, and one of the first things that we realize as we get out into the public is everyone comes to it with their own set of ideas. Right? I want feature X. Oh, no, I want feature Y. Oh, OK, I want feature Z. Now you're going in 3 different directions. So we needed a way for people to check in and say, oh, where are you going? What's in our heads? Well, let's just write it down. We have a roadmap. We know generally what the next feature is going to have, and maybe a vague idea about the feature after that, or the release after that. No problem. We'll put that in a roadmap, and then that will give people confidence as they come to the project what to do next. This might seem obvious in hindsight, but trust that we did not think of that coming out of the gate for some reason or another. Another thing that we started doing is to use a Microsoft technique. So when you're sitting down with a group of engineers and you're trying to work through the design of feature X. And feature X, you do not want the whole hour taken up by their pet changes that they want to do. So we say, OK, our goals of this meeting, our goals of this design are these. And then our non-goals are all of these things. It's not to say that we won't do them. We might do them later. But focus on the goals. We used a similar technique on the TypeScript team to get the energies of the community focused on the goals that we wanted to go after, and to kind of stop suggesting features in the non-goals. This is actually still up there. So when you contribute a feature request to TypeScript, you say, I have read the goals and non-goals document. And you don't have to necessarily read through these word for word, but you can get a general sense that there is kind of a thou shalt and thou shalt not kind of sense to them. to help focus the energy of the contributions that we would get. Another lesson that we kind of had a hunch for, but when you see it play out, it's really striking. I'm going to give my really poor biology knowledge really quickly, and then people can correct me after. But with DNA, you have a blueprint, and that blueprint creates the proteins, and then there you go. That's how you create a system over time. The DNA for a project are the behaviors, the attitudes, the actions that the creators are taking. So if I create a project and I come in and I have a very calming, relaxed way that I respond to issues, then people will begin to pick up on that. And the next set of contributors see that, well, that's how the founder does it, so that's how we'll kind of do it. And they'll morph some of that into how they act. And this creates a culture that I would call the DNA. Like each new generation of contributors that come, and generation might be this week, this person is a junior and now they're senior, and then you have the next junior that has never touched the project before. But they get to see each other. And so that habits, the way that you respond, the focus, the attitude, all get reflected, and then the people that stay reflect that to the next set of people. And they also reflect what we'll call the vision. So what's the vision? As a creator of this project, we have a particular idea that we want to get forward. We have a vision, like we can kind of see over the hill of where this thing wants to go. With TypeScript, we say, well, if we can get more and more people contributing to it, we can get more and more functionality. People will just add types to this library, and then the next set of people will be able to use them. So if we have what we call like a memorable reason for being, that's something that might stick in your head. If you're at the AV1 talk, it might be next generation, like a free next generation AV codec. Okay. And then that sticks in the mind of the people that come to it and say, okay, I want to work on a free next generation codec. That sounds great. And then that passes along. This becomes a rallying point. So you'll notice these themes pop up in Twitter. People will talk about, well, have you seen the next generation of AV codecs? And they will point at it. And lesson number 5, this is where, okay, so those first 4 might be somewhat obvious, depending on your background. But lesson 5 to me seemed like the most confusing of the set. We have a project. I've written lots of code before, but I've never taken a project and said, how do we know that we're going in the right direction? How do we know that if I add this feature instead of this one, that is the right direction for this project? And we had to learn that as we went. You can kind of think of users as the target. So you've got a bullseye set of users, and we'll call those the key users, or the stakeholders. And these users are really intimately involved with using your project. They have a lot of ideas, likely. They're available for a deep dive, so that you can ask them a lot of questions and really get a sense for, like, how are they using it? These set of key users are also kind of indicative of the problems that some of the larger community is feeling. So if you have like with TypeScript, we had the Angular team, which is Angular being a JavaScript framework. We were watching how they would use it, or the Ember team would use it. They say, well, this is really cool, except there's this whole set of things that we can't type. Oh, well, that's interesting. Maybe we should work on that. And those key users then opened up new possibilities for users of TypeScript going forward. But not to be, forgotten, the fans of the project and the wider community are just as important as the key users. But the way that we work with them is different. So these are, obviously the largest part of our growth as the users would grow in number would be in this wider community. So how would we get information from them? Well, we can't just sit down with every single 10,000 or 100,000 users and get every single pain point they have? Well, we kind of can. It's in a different way. So we can do surveys. We can look through the issue tracker and find themes in the issue tracker. Well, that's pretty handy. Now, if we have themes, we can say, well, if we address this theme, then that set of users that was affected by it, their life gets a little bit better. And yeah, this kind of opens up more future exploration as well. Another kind of lesson that you can draw out of the same thing is that you may think this is where the target is. Well, it's obvious to you, this is clearly where the target is. And then your competition comes along and sees that you're starting to take off, and they have a different set of ideas. With TypeScript, we had Facebook Flow. So Facebook had their own TypeScript-esque project, and they came along and said, well, your target is not the right one. This target is. And we could look at that and we can see, well, are any users leaving us to go use them? Or are they getting users that are just kind of choosing their features? How many of those features can we take? Can we put into TypeScript? Can we fold some of that into what we do? So as another way to calibrate to see if you're going in the right direction, you can look at your user feedback, but the competition is also looking to perhaps capture users you don't have. So this information, like how we started growing TypeScript, and that was just kind of a small sample. It'd take far too long to kind of unpack all the kinds of things that we did. But as we started doing that, and as TypeScript started growing, that started a chain reaction. So projects would come to us and say, well, can you teach us how to do open source? And we're like, yeah, I mean, I can try. I can show you what we did. And it's kind of working, though there probably are better ways, but at least it's working. And so the .NET team came and we went and taught them. And then, wow, C# is open sourcing. Oh, okay, we'll teach them too. And other teams started coming. And at some point, it was like every week, there was a team that wanted to do open source. So I left Microsoft in October of 2015. By the end of 2015, like only a couple months later, I had an ex-coworker reach out and say, hey, guess what? They flipped the default. What do you mean they flipped the default? I'm used to working with legal corporate affairs and used to working with the vice president to say whether or not something can go open source. And now because of this, how open source is starting to catch on in developer division, that becomes the default. And now you have to have a reason not to be open source, which kind of blows the mind, especially if you've seen that only happened in a few years. Just a fun little fact. I went and looked to see how TypeScript was doing these days, so kind of roll the clock forward a bit. And this is number 5 programming language on GitHub right now, which it's like more popular than C++ and Go and C# in open source. So it's one in 5 JavaScript projects by JavaScript developers in open source is now in TypeScript. So it's phenomenal. I definitely don't take credit for all that growth. I'm just kind of a piece of that happening. But it was really awesome to be part of that. OK, quick breath. So that was kind of the TypeScript side. Let's kind of switch and talk about the Rust side. So like I said, I worked on the TypeScript project. I was like, oh, this is great. And even felt a bit confident that I could go in and do it again. Yeah, sure, no problem. Here we go, Rust project, here I come. So I come into the Rust project and I realize that it's already established. I can't just come in and start changing things. You have a community that's small. It's healthy, but it's pretty small. But it has this established DNA. It has a way of doing things. They already do kind of a communal decision-making process. So you can't just tell people what to do. OK, all right, OK. And it's already good open source. It's on liberally licensed. It's on GitHub. It already has contributors. It's doing really well in that regard. So as you can imagine, my first day, I got a lot of blank stares because I came in and said, all right, this is how Microsoft did it, wrote a bunch of stuff on the whiteboard, and they're like, cool story, bro. That's not going to work here. Okay, all right. I will do something different. I want to help, but I don't know how to help yet. So I had to figure that out. The first thing that Aaron Turan, who's the Rust lead at Mozilla, he sat me down and says, okay, we need more compiler engineers, so you're going to be a compiler engineer. I said, I haven't touched a compiler in about 4+ years. I've just done like this really pointy-haired boss, like TypeScript team thing. Okay, I will work on the compiler. So maybe I can take working on the compiler and I can work on the compiler in such a way that it improves something more generally, maybe? Okay. So I reach out to the compiler team lead. I say, help. I need a project to work on. He said, I have a thought. Ah, yes. Which leads us to lesson 6, but I'm going to show you this first. So he's like, here are error messages today. Here's what they look like. And if you're used to Clang and GCC, that's not that bad. They're okay. You can kind of squint, and if you can parse a C++ template error, like that's nothing, right? But he said, I have this idea. I kind of scribbled it one time. I didn't have time to look at it. And he kind of pulls out and says, what if we just put their code and then label it and put like little things on the labels? I said, hey, I can do that. In fact, I can spend far too much time trying to perfect the perfect design for that. But it's something I can do. So that's what we did. So we built these new error messages into the Rust compiler. And we put it behind a flag. We only switched a few error messages. But I was like, that's enough. I can take that and I can show people and say, look, here are a new kind of error message. I hope you like it. And people really, really liked it. And so what I kind of took from that is I can create a lot of stress by coming into a situation and say, I have a lot of ideas. Everyone gather around the whiteboard. Here are my ideas. When they already have hundreds of people giving them ideas, or now thousands, that's not going to work. But I can make a demo like all right, I'll change this error message to this new error message, and maybe I can get some momentum around people caring about usability. All right. As long as they can touch it and feel it, that might build momentum. So I start building this thing, and when you compile the Rust compiler, especially back then, it took about 45 minutes each time. It's like, this is going to take forever. There are so many error messages. I cannot do this myself. Okay, Aaron, help me again. All right, so I did your compile thing. Now help me, like, how do I do all these error messages? It's going to take me forever. It's like, okay, there's a thing called a quest issue. And I'm like, what? This is not a video game. Like, what is a quest issue? So, okay, here. Quest issue is where you have a blueprint that walks you through how to do thing. It's very detailed and very repeatable. Okay, you know how to do the error messages. You've been working on them for a couple of weeks. Write the steps down, how to do it, A, B, C, D, and then people can come in. They can have confidence that they can do that fix, and then they can submit the PR, and then it lands in the compiler, and holy crap, I did that error message. It's like, oh, there's a lot of incentive there. Okay. So I was like, okay, maybe we'll get a dozen people. A dozen's a lot. I'll take a dozen. So I worked with some folks, wrote the documentation, put the documentation up there, and then let people start signing up for it. And yeah, a lot of people signed up for this. Lots of people. In fact, we had 85 people jump on and send us pull requests. Now, the interesting thing with doing the quest issue and having that in the back of your mind is that when the PRs come in from people that, oh, okay, they followed the steps, but they missed one. Hey, you're the one who wrote the steps. You can quickly debug the PR, get them on the right track, and get a higher quality PR. The interesting thing about this group, so I started asking around, can you believe that for at least 10 of these people, this was their first contribution to open source ever? So if you have the steps and they can have confidence in this juicy idea of, oh, maybe I can land in the compiler itself and then I can use it, it's a good carrot. The other thing that this did was that as people came to it, you'd imagine most people would fall off. They submit the PR, they get it to land, yay, good for me, and then they would just leave. 1 or 2 people stuck around. And in fact, one of them is leading the error code, like the error message, continuous improvement, even today, years later. So they're still improving the error messages going forward. Being able to attract that kind of person and give them enough of an incentive to stay is awesome. So this leads us to kind of the next lesson as part of this, that we can do work in, say, ergonomics like we did with Rust and error messages, right? Updating an error message doesn't break Rust. It doesn't make it slow or anything. It just gives you a better error message. And then people can have a better expectation for how this works. If we can do better error messages, maybe we can do faster compiles, or maybe we can do better IDE. And it creates this sense that I can have nice things. I can have my cake and eat it too. And that's the kind of feeling that if users can feel that and then can suggest ways to make the project grow in that way, then we have a much better set of contributors. All right, so we have people coming on. They can help out in some places. That's cool. But let's maybe roll back the clock a bit and see that there was another thing where Rust needed to grow. I don't have it in this chart. When I joined in March of 2016, I remember pulling Aaron aside and I said, okay, you've got, it was something like 7 sub-teams, and you have 7 people that work for you, and each one of them is on 6 of these sub-teams. Like, this can't be good. Like, how is this sustainable? If you have to have 1 more sub-team, you're gonna have like 3 of your team quit or something. Like, no one can juggle that much. And this was a slow and steady growth initially to kind of bring a new person on and then mentor them. But then it became worth it. They stuck around and they mentored the next person. And so maybe now your team isn't wearing 6 hats, they're wearing 5 or 4. And the more that we can get them down to 1, the better. This really started taking off because people realized, oh my gosh, Rust is cool. And also, I have a chance to be a part of a sub-team now. I didn't think I had a chance because, I mean, I knew everyone's name and they're in 6 different ones and I don't have that much time. But now there's a slot available. They'll just take me in, they'll teach me how to do it. And now we can grow from that really tiny set of people to a much larger set. And just like this graph shows, this really shot off as we were like, okay, we need a team that does release management because it's 1 person. It's Alex. For those of you who do Rust, Alex did everything back in the day. We need a release management team. Then all of a sudden, all these DevOps people just kind of appeared. They're like, hey, I can do a thing. I can do DevOps. I can do that. And then we went from 0 to 12 people like overnight. Well, okay. I mean, and sure enough, they're good. You know, they know what they're talking about. They kind of sort it out, and now they've got a release process. You make this space. We're still trying to figure out some of these. I would love to get your feedback on how do you not spend 2 to 4 hours a day on PR code reviews, right? So there's still some pain points, but we're realizing that we have to be able to spread the load. We have to be able to mentor people. And then as we grow, that then has to be able to be another set of mentoring that happens. This last lesson is one that I could probably talk all day about. This is really tricky, and I'm going to do my best to unpack it in a couple of minutes. If you look at a project of people, you know, the contributors, the users, the kind of the founders, they're working together. And If the founders say, you know what, you know what we're going to do? We're going to add, I don't know, we'll just add this backdoor into it. We'll add a new feature that connects to a proprietary cloud service, right? We're going to do telemetry, and then we're going to track you on your computer. Okay, those are extreme examples, but you can think of plenty of examples of where a decision was made by the management, even in an open source sense, like the owners of the project. They make a decision and people panic. Like, what are you doing? Why wasn't I consulted about that? Like, don't you care about my opinion? Like, don't you care that I'm a user, that I contribute to your project? So there's something that Dave Herman, which is a good friend of mine, likes to bang on about. And he says, look, why wasn't I consulted is how you do open source. You bring the decision-making process out from behind closed doors and put it in front of people. Like, every decision that you make, if it's going to affect the project, needs to be discussed and needs to be decided as a group. Rust has really embraced this. It's kind of stumbled here and there, but the RFC process allows even decisions about the next year of stuff that we do or the next 3 years of stuff that we do to be talked about publicly and for people to decide, okay, yes, that sounds good, and they generally nod, and they go off in this direction, and now they have ownership in that direction. It's not just the owners decided, okay, that sounds good, let's go off in this direction, and then leave everyone behind. This ownership, I kind of alluded to this with spreading the load, but if people feel like their opinions don't matter, then they don't contribute as hard. They don't work as hard to succeed. And in Rust, the kind of community that they want to build is a lot of people that care a lot and that own a lot of the Rust project, so that as Rust grows, they continue to push and they continue to recruit more people as part of that. We want that shared ownership of those wins and losses. If we make mistakes, let's own the mistake, correct it, and then move forward. Rust, I did the same thing that I did on the TypeScript side. Rust is looking pretty good. So that research language that we kind of saw in 2016 has then grown, built a much larger subteam to support it, and now also has a nice list of people that are using it. The Microsofts and Google, Facebook all have some interesting projects in Rust. I put Canonical, CoreOS, System 76. If you use System 76, I think as you boot, you're like already using Rust. So it's a cool project, but it also is finding that the set of users, commercial users that are using it for real in real projects. And Rust has also continued to grow in the list of programming languages on GitHub. It's now number 13, up from number 15 a few months ago, and then up from number 40, a couple years ago. So it's really starting to take off. Do a quick summary slide if anyone wants to take a picture to kind of get a sense for some of the stuff we talked about. And with that, I'll open it up for questions.
Check 1, 2, yep.
So I was wondering how the Mozilla Foundation can foot the cost of all these full-time developers. And it's scaling up really fast, and it's very successful. So how do you sustain it?
So that's a great question. The question was around Mozilla Foundation, which we affectionately called MoFo. Yeah, in case you didn't have that one. I was shocked my first day. What? We call it what? So Mozilla Foundation, are they paying for all these people that are contributing? In a sense, like, how can we continue to sustain that growth? And I will tell you that the percent of people that are contributing to Rust that are Mozilla employees is going down over time, not up. That percentage is, if it were going up, then Mozilla has this really large amount of money they have to spend in Rust. But what we want, ideally, is we want Google to give a couple people, Facebook to have a couple people. And when you do that, now we have a much diversified pool. We have a lot of different ideas. That's great. But it's also, if anything happens to any one company, which would be bad, but if it happens, Rust lives on. Sure.
So someone's organizing a BOF session in this same room for lunch on Rust and WebAssembly. If there is any Rust full-timer who would like to join us, that would be great.
Cool, thanks for that.
I see Rust has recently moved to having the release version model. Do you think that is helping to target the feedback coming in for the RFCs and like the Rust 2019 hashtag ideas that people are posting, having them targeted around like a release timeframe?
Let me see if I can repeat the question, make sure I get it. So recently Rust released Rust 2018, its first major version since its 1.0 release. And the way that they do that, it's a little bit much to get into in this, but it's a backwards compatible, we have forwards new functionality way of doing it. It's very cool, and it gives a way to add new features and even break a few things without breaking the ecosystem. So the question was around, is this model something that we think could continue going forward to address what now?
Sorry, do you think it will help improve the targeting of the feedback in regards to collaboration on features through the RFC process? Mm-hmm. Like, will it give people a focus on generics or traits or improvements around those things, whatever the ideas might be? I see at the start of the year there was a Rust 2019 hashtag for people to post blog posts on ideas of what they'd like to see coming in the future. To give something a focus to work towards.
Yeah, I think the short answer is yes. I think the general answer is that what happens is people post their blog posts. This is where we want Rust to go in 2019. I want this feature. I want this feature. I want this capability. Right now, a lot of people are saying, we want maturity. We want slow down and give us the features you've already given us, just polish them. So yes, it does give a chance for people to voice those ideas, and then we collect that into a theme for the year. And those themes inform where the teams will go next. So if there's a theme around async I/O, so async await is a hot feature, people really want that one, and there's going to be kind of a team that forms around that, and it's going to kind of carry that over the line this year, likely. Yeah. Oh, sorry, we have one back here.
Yeah, just real quickly, I have a question. So you were talking about the budget that the marketing team at Microsoft had for the work you're doing on TypeScript. As they started embracing more open source technology, did that change by default? Were there more resources put into community building through outreach, or?
That is a question that you would think I would have the answer to, but I don't. What ended up happening is we just got in our world of this is how we do it in open source, and we communicate directly through Twitter or GitHub to our users, and they communicate right back to us. And we never really thought about it after a point. Now I'm sure as it grew, the marketing people had their own thing that they were doing behind the scenes, potentially. But the connection to the Angular team is something that I just called them up and said, hey, we have engineers, and you have engineers. Let's just sit around and solve problems. And that's how that happened. It wasn't like a behind-the-scenes marketing kind of thing.
Well, the question was more on, did Microsoft start valuing this and putting resources toward it?
So the question, just to kind of repeat it for the video, was around, did Microsoft put marketing dollars into it once open source started taking off? I don't know. I kind of left right as they're really picking it up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just picking up on the question before that one and the slide behind you there. as the team of like official contributors grows larger and larger, how do we avoid a bias to activity? We don't like if we decide, hey, the focus has now shifted away from working on Rust itself to working on tools that just happen to use Rust, then a bunch of these core teams or whatever the group of teams, they have to effectively disband because like we're done, we've solved our problem. So how do we avoid a biased activity where now, because you're part of this group and you consider that an important part of yourself, you feel like you have to keep changing and have to keep contributing to the core of Rust?
So I kind of alluded to this, and it's remember the target where I said, well, if you have a focus of users, this focus of users, if you make yourself the only user, you can kind of get stuck in, this is what I want to do. But pulling yourself out and having a set of, it doesn't have to be a large step, but a set of people that you know will generally pull you in the right direction. Like, oh yeah, they're doing really good stuff. If they say, well, the compile times, not to pick on anything in particular, need a little work, they'll just keep saying it, right? So you kind of keep getting refocused. Oh no, we still need to do that in 2019. We still need to do that in 2020. So yeah, make sure you keep that feedback going. Absolutely. Any other questions?
Hi, everyone. So yeah, thank you for all the work on TypeScript. I feel like it's been a great source of inspiration for tools like Flow and ECMAScript over the years. The JavaScript community seems to move pretty fast and there's a lot of changes. What do you feel is the future for TypeScript over, say, the next 10 years?
Oh gosh, I wish I knew. One of the things that just came out recently, NPM does this survey every year. In the upcoming survey, they've already kind of hinted 60-some% of professional JavaScript developers use TypeScript in some way or shape or form. We never predicted that was going to be the case, that it was going to grow to that size. I don't think any of us know, like, how does that shift? Like, what does the future look like when 80% of JavaScript is done in TypeScript? No one knows. So that doesn't really answer your question, but I think there's a lot of this just exploring as you go and trying to figure out, like, what does it make sense to add at this point? Do we need to add much, or can we just see what the next level of JavaScript development? We mentioned WebAssembly. That's another one. Maybe we look into WebAssembly. Yeah.
Cool. Well, on behalf of everyone, I'd like to give you a small token of our appreciation.
Thank you.
So give them a big round of applause.